Hey folks, Miche here, and another episode of the Not Too Late Show, where it's never too late to wake up, to become your best self loving self, to learn something new, to start a revolution. I'm here to encourage you. Today, I want to talk about the idea of, is the glass half full or half empty? And I propose that it's never either that one or the other, and that there is no empty, because the air is always around us, filled with energy, scalar energy. Uh, there is there's no nothing. There's always something in our reality, which is also filled with nothing. So that's kind of crazy, but I think maybe you follow what I'm talking about. If the glass is half full of water, liquid, whatever, what is in that other half? There's something. There's something that gets displaced if you put more water in. Okay, I'm not a physicist. I'm not going there. What I want to talk about in terms of glass half full and half empty is the idea that it's our perception. I mean, that's the point of that question, right? Is how are you perceiving circumstances, your situation, the world at large? Is it half full or half empty? And it really matters which way you look at it. And it's also not just this way or that way. Maybe, if you want to stick with the 50-50 idea, sometimes it's this way and sometimes it's that way. And then sometimes, going back to a little quantum theory or something, sometimes it's both at the same time. It feels like it's half full and it feels like it's half empty. Um, and actually, I would now contradict myself and say that, um, going back to the idea that it's never really, split in the middle, right? There's a combination. It's a living, changing thing. Our perception of reality and the circumstances around us are always changing and always shifting. So to get caught up in feeling like which way something is, that it is this or it is that, is really doing yourself a disservice and really limiting what is possible. So, just on that note, I have like a teaching tale that I've heard many times that I wanted to share with you. And I've heard it as my old Indian grandmother told me this. I've heard it as what this version I'm going to tell you is from a village in northern China. I've heard it as a Jewish tale. Everybody is in on this wisdom. Okay, so and I'm getting this, just so you know, from the Multi-Faith Storytelling Institute.org, and this version is recrafted by Mark Novak. So it's titled What Seems Like a Curse. Long ago, in a village in northern China, there lived a man who owned a magnificent horse. So beautiful was this horse that people came from miles around just to admire it. They told him he was blessed to own such a horse. Perhaps, he said, but what seems like a blessing may be a curse. One day the horse ran off. It was gone. People came to say how sorry they were for his bad luck. Perhaps, he said, but what seems like a curse may be a blessing. A few weeks later, the horse returned, and it was not alone. It was followed by 21 wild horses. By the law of the land, they became his property. He was rich with horses. His neighbors came to congratulate him on his good fortune. Truly, they said, you have been blessed. Perhaps, but what seems like a blessing may be a curse. Shortly after this, his son, his only son, tried to ride one of the horses. He was thrown from it and he broke his leg. The man's neighbors came to say how sorry they were. Surely he had been cursed. Perhaps, he said, but what seems like a curse may be a blessing. A week later, the king came through that village, drafting every able bodied young man for a war against the people of the north. It was horrible war. Everyone who went from the village was killed. Only that man's son survived because of his broken leg. To this day in that village, they say what seems like a blessing may be a curse, and what seems like a curse may be a blessing. So there you have it. My point. Things change. I think sometimes things change even in the moment. And just kind of going back to that story, I would say that yes, for a while, this guy was probably it was a blessing or felt like a blessing to have these 21 wild horses on his property, part of his estate or whatever. Um, I imagine there were other difficulties that came up with it and other wonderful things about it, and then in the end it turned out, um, that the son, well, you heard the story, right? Just saying that even the story itself is kind of black and white. And I'm still harping on the point that it's all a combination. It's all in flux always. There's some of this and there's some of that. And when we are attentive in the moment, when we can stay present to what is around us, to what we feel inside of us, to the energy that we are vibrating in, or the energy that we're putting out, we get to have this whole dance and mix and variation of life in us, around us, through us, as opposed to when we're stuck in the this or that, the dualistic paradigm. It's good, it's bad, it's on, it's off. Um, Light switches maybe like that, although I suspect that if you looked at it a lot closer, at some point, there may be some point where it's kind of on and off. Don't know. Uh, yeah. Okay. So that was one of the big stories that I wanted to share with you. Another story, teaching story that I've learned, and I have only heard this one about a Jewish family grandmother, is a young woman is recently married and she's doing the whole homemaker cooking thing. And every Sunday she makes a roast. And every Sunday she cuts the ends off of this roast, puts it in a pan, puts it in the oven. And, one day her partner is looking at her and says, why do you cut the ends off? And she said, I don't know. My mother always cut the ends off. Um, I guess I'll ask her. So she calls up mom and she says, Mom, why do you always cut the ends off of the roast when you put it in the pan into the oven? And mom says, I don't know. That's how grandma always did it. So that's how I always do it. All right. So fortunately, grandma's still around to tell the story. We go and we ask grandma, why do you cut the ends off of the roast before you put it in the pan all the time? And grandma looks at him and says, the roast that I had didn't fit in the pan, so I had to cut the ends off. So how many things are we walking around taking, as rules, or even as, tradition, as some sacred sort of tradition to keep and to not uh, change or invent upon, or just throw out the window and do something else entirely, because we think there's this maybe reason or impact of doing it that way, and then come to find out that it was expedience. It was necessary at the time. The roast didn't fit in the pan she cut the ends off. And suppose she could have maybe bought a smaller roast, but maybe that wasn't available. So she just always cut the ends off, and it just went on down as a tradition. Um, you have a bigger pan. Many of us have, metaphorically speaking, bigger pans, more bandwidth to communicate and to explore and to discover things in the world, because we're connected and we can learn from each other in ways that we weren't able to, 100 years ago. And again, to stay present and open and curious, and try not to limit yourself to simply what you see around you and what you take um, as law, or as not to be trifled with, messed with, whatever. There's another story that I read just recently, and it's about this whole thing about how many thousands of steps a day you should be walking in order to, be optimally healthy. or at least optimally walking, exercising in your life, right? And I think the going rate right now is 10,000. It might actually be more. So what I read was that back maybe, I don't know, whenever it was, whenever that sort of came up as a thing, I'd say a couple of decades ago. Really, what that was about is that some company in Japan was creating, some version of a pedometer or some like a back then kind of Fitbit sort of thing, and they had figured out that 7,000 steps was optimal, but 7,000 didn't sound so good. It didn't sell so well, so they made it 10,000. And how many people have been, busting their legs for the 10,000 steps when apparently they could have stopped at 7 and sat down, drank some water, and had as good result, maybe better, than 10,000. So these kinds of stories and contradictions, or little unknown pieces that create the rules in our society, abound. I think, you probably have some stories of your own that you could tell, or we could, dig into what is it, why do we do what we do? Excuse me. Um, and I just kind of want to throw in that little bit of curiosity and questioning and wondering, especially when what it is that you're either being asked to do or that you think you should do or need to do doesn't really suit you. It doesn't maybe fit your personality in some circumstances. It doesn't fit your vision of how you want to go about something, or about how something is going to happen for you. And we hesitate to step out, partly because we think we're sort of breaking, some rules, some, don't step on the crack sort of thing. And you have some plan that, stepping on the crack is going to get you to some new spot. If you follow the crack, you might go somewhere else. And I think that as light workers, as healers, as coaches, as teachers, as people exploring what it is to be here on this planet and kind of become uh, more and most of who we can be, who that is, you have to step out of these narrow lanes and paradigms and rules, because that's not where your brilliance, your genius, or just your difference is. And I don't think we're here to be homogenous. I think we're here to be our own unique selves and to express that for our own purpose, for our own good, and also as a greater purpose, as part of the whole evolution of humanity. I think that we each come here, and that we ourselves, our own nature, is the gift and the contribution to the world, to humanity at large. And our responsibility being here, if we have any, is to be that. To be that, I would add, with love and compassion, um, but to look at who we are and to start expressing that maybe more, um, in areas that maybe we felt like we couldn't or shouldn't, because it steps out of that the norm, and that the shoulds, right? And I guess my life has been kind of full of stepping out of the norm, in many ways, starting with being a young child, female, thinking that I was supposed to have been born a boy, and still embodying a lot of that male and kind of non-binary presence and energy and belief. Um, I worked as an auto mechanic in my early 20s. I started taking jewelry making classes in high school, only because at that time in the 70s, girls were not allowed to take metal shop, or even in the high school that I went to, they had like auto mechanic shop, and they wouldn't let me in that either. So uh, when the metal shop instructor taught himself how to make jewelry and started a jewelry making class, I jumped on it, not because I was really interested in jewelry, but because it was as close as I could get to tools, to torches and pliers and files and saws and all of that stuff. So I've been sort of, bucking bucking a line all along my life, including when I was 19, 20. I got went and got my hack license, and for a very short time became a yellow cab driver in Manhattan. And well, there probably were not too many other 19 or 20-year-old females doing that. I'm sure there were other women driving cabs at that time, but definitely I was, the odd one out in that too. And it's been a struggle a lot of times to do that and to be on the, my own edge like that, or on the edge of my family like that. It also wasn't a choice in the sense that this is like who I am, how I from my core was expressing myself, and what was in alignment for me. I mean, not that my purpose in life was to be a yellow cab driver, but to explore and to try the things that were calling to me, that pulled at me, as opposed to all the things that people thought I should be doing or could be doing that did not pull me. In fact, a lot of them repelled me, like wearing a dress, or as a little girl wearing a dress, wearing patent leather shoes. This was like the bane of my childhood existence. I wanted to be, in jeans and a t-shirt, or even in a button down and a tie. I was cool with that, but that never came to be. Okay, so um, yeah, enough about all of that. Let me kind of regroup here for a moment. Um, right, the point being, okay, here's another a story from later in my life, pertinent in maybe in on a different level for following being who you are, acknowledging how you are, sort of what makes you tick, or just even what your personal preferences are, or like maybe you've heard that we tend to have a dominant way of learning, of receiving information. Like some people are more auditory, so they're going to want to hear something more, and some people are more visual, so it's going to be important maybe for them to read the book to get the point. Somebody's going to be better, being spoken to, told the information. Somebody's gonna not only want to read the book, but they're more tactile, so they want to hold the book while they read it, and that sort of thing. Some of us are early birds, some of us are night owls, and that kind of thing. And so rather than try to keep forcing ourselves into some middle ground or norm, honor what's true about you. How are you wired? How does it work? And also just what are your circumstances in the moment? So for example, I've struggled with depression for many years. And some years ago, I would say maybe even as much as 15 years ago, when blogs were becoming, the thing online, I felt that I had things that I wanted to share and talk about and offer to people. And I felt that I wanted to have a blog. But at the time, there were all these rules. Like if you're going to have a blog, in order for it to be successful, you have to blog 3 times a week, or at the same time, or once a week, but at the same time every day, or every day of the week, or whatever it was. But there were all these gurus of internet world that were popping up, had these rules and these contingencies. And frankly, at the time, because of living with my depression, my days and my hours were pretty unpredictable. And I did not feel that I could pull that off. And so rather than do what I could, how I could, I didn't do it. I just said, okay, well, I guess I can't do that, or that's not for me, or I'm going to fail, because this is what you need to do. This is what must be done in order to be successful. And that one, was based on depression and difficulty. But sometimes it's just, it's just who you are. I mean, well, that was part of who I was at the time too, or what I was going through, what I deal with. um, but if you're really not any good in the morning, and you have to have business meetings or teach a workshop or set up appointments with somebody, don't do it at 8 in the morning. Like, just don't. Even if everybody's like, well, you need to start the day and get a, jump on everything. they're talking about some vague, ineffable you, right? Some majority that doesn't even really exist. So um, you are not the one who has to do it that way. You are the one who has to figure out what's the right way for you to do it and then go about that. And it's not always easy. Sometimes it is. It's simple. You just make an appointment, your doctor's appointment. You don't make it at 8, you make it at 11 in the morning or whatever. And other times, being you and doing it the way you need to do is more challenging because it pushes more against your family, your partner, your friends, your society, your culture, or your religion, or whatever it is. There's so many gates and barriers that need to be um, passed or eliminated or jumped over, whatever it is, sometimes in order to get to the clear space of who we are and how we need to operate. And there's not a lot of encouragement in our world, in our society in general, for people to look for that, to find that, to go after that. Maybe if somebody is seen as some sort of genius or prodigy, then they're pushed and encouraged and helped along. But for so many people, you're really pushed and encouraged to color within the lines and to stay within your lane and to, maybe uh, ascend, but only in the prescribed steps that are there, right? To go in the direction that the dominant culture you're in thinks you should go. And for me, I spent much of my life on trying to figure out, what is my path, what is my purpose, and not feeling like I was finding my way. And a lot of that was because I kept looking to other people to follow them in order to find my way. And there's a problem in that equation right there, right? You can't try to be your own good version of somebody else in order to figure out how to be yourself. You can only work and experiment and explore being yourself in order to be yourself, right? And that requires some introspection. It requires taking some risks. It requires being vulnerable, if only with yourself, but often beyond that, being showing yourself, becoming visible in the truth of who you are, and to learn to appreciate and love that within yourself and to accept that in yourself. And the more that you do that, the more you can feel confident within yourself that how you're expressing yourself or what your goal is or what your vision is really in alignment with you, not with other people, not with other schools of thought or whatever, but really truly within you, is what gives you the strength to go out there and be more visible and deal with whatever may arise from that. And we worry about what might arise from that, but sometimes glass half full, glass half empty, right? We step out, we take these risks. It feels like, glass half empty because I'm worried and I don't have support and I don't know where I'm going and there's uncertainty. Glass half full, or more than half full, is when people can see the true you, is when the people who are meant to connect with you can find you. If you are not being truly you, how are your people, how are your kindred souls going to know who you are to come and connect with you and support you and resonate with you and create something even greater together? I am going to take a pause here and I will be back shortly. And I'm back. And I want to read you a very short piece, I don't know, poem maybe, just thought that I have that I share with people, that I ask myself. And it's this. So I'm not asking who do you want to become? I'm asking, who are you already that you're not letting yourself be? And if you let yourself be truly you, how marvelous would that be? Take a breath. What a relief. How does that resonate with you? What comes up as you hear that? How much energy do you put in on a daily basis trying to be who you think you ought to be and trying not to be who you really are? And how much more energy, fun, joy might you be having if you release yourself from just a few of those little bonds, right? Because there's big ones. There's the big ones that we know and that we see all around us and that we're heard. And then there's all these little, insidious ones, ways that we try to push ourselves into a box or into a rule or into a should, right? Ways that, as my non-physical beings, friends, Elohim, talk about, that basically that we're mean to ourselves, right? That we say things, that we speak to ourselves harshly, unkindly. And a lot of times it's sort of to try to keep ourselves in line, in those lines. And what if you allowed yourself to really fully explore? I mean, it's not to say, of course, there's things in my personality or in my life that I still strive to change or shift or grow beyond. I don't think we're ever, a done deal as long as we're awake and alive. But that's not the same as rejecting myself, trying to, cut parts of me off, trying to, disavow what's coming up for me. It's part of a whole, right? That glass, it's half full and half empty, and it's full because there's stuff other than water in that glass. And then there's the glass, and where does the inside of the glass meet the outside of the glass? And I could go down that rabbit hole for a while, but basically, again, just wanting to say, actually, I forgot what I wanted to say. What did I want to say? I don't know. I forget already what I wanted to say, but so what I want to say in this moment, and there it is, okay, being in the moment, right? Because part of my head is like, oh, no, wait a minute, you have to stick with this. You have to figure out what was it that you just wanted to say, and you have to find it and you have to share it. And this other part of me is like, yeah, I don't think so. I tend to lose thoughts. I start to ramble, I lose it, and I'm going to allow myself to do that. And I'm going to say for myself, it's okay. And I'm just going to move forward. And for me, in my life, that's an example of not being mean to myself, of accepting, just in a small way in this very moment, who I am, what's going on. I have other things to say, and I will find them as I go, as I step into each moment. And what I was going to say may come up again or may not. And other than using this as kind of a teaching example, I'm actually going to let that go. So, what ways, what places can you look into and let go? Let go and welcome. Welcome you as you let go of what is not you. What would that mean for you? What would that bring into your life? And, if you're a parent, what would that model for your children? If you want your children to learn to be themselves, with awareness, with responsibility. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we, kind of go off the deep end or, hurt other people or any of that. My teaching, my discussion here is, within a container of love and kindness and compassion. Firstly, especially to ourselves, and then also to others. So I maybe should have, made that clear in the beginning, but I think those of you who are hanging around and listening to me are pretty much on the same page, except when it comes to ourselves, right? I mean, if you think back, maybe just through the day or through the week or whatever, think of what if you pay attention to what you say to yourself, to the tone of voice in your head, speaking to yourself. What does that sound like? And how does that compare to how you speak to your loved ones? And you may find a discrepancy there. And don't you deserve the same love and kindness and compassion that you afford the people in your life who you love? And the thing is, when you start loving yourself and affording yourself that, it's a cycle, right? You start to love and appreciate yourself a little bit more. You start to love yourself a little more. You start to love yourself a little more. You take a little better care of yourself and speak to yourself a little more kindly and cut yourself a little more slack, maybe, and accept, the humanness of who you are, the way you would accept, in a friend, their imperfections, right? I like to say that we are divine beings in human suits, here to have an experience of being human. And we are, as the divine beings that we are, we're perfect. And as the human that we are, we're imperfect. And so if we understand the journey that we're here on, the exploration, then we are perfectly imperfect, because we're here to explore and discover. I want to insert here a talk that I gave a few years ago about entitled 3 Ways to Feel Better About Yourself Without Changing a Thing. I think it's pretty germane to the conversation here, and I hope that it just adds a little more insight and wisdom and space for you to be yourself. Hi, I'm Miche from the Spoonbenders Cafe, where I like to say that loving yourself is the greatest superpower you've got. And I'm wondering if you, like myself, any other healers, artists, light workers, are ever hard on yourself and ever feel like, you're not living up to your own expectations, or you can't catch up, or you're just not getting where you want to be, and you're just not nice to yourself sometimes. So I want to give you a few tips tonight on how you can feel better about yourself, even without changing a thing, or at least without changing anything, externally. It's really an inner game. It's a mindset. And so I just want to give you some quick tips on how you can feel better by changing how and what you're thinking. Okay, so the first thing that I want to say is you got to get some perspective, and you got to cut yourself some slack. Especially for us light workers, we think we came here, to be these perfect embodiments of spiritual, divine energy and gifted to the world and all of that. And granted, we're here for a big purpose. I know it. And we already are divine. We already came in as perfect and enough and ready and capable, right? But we came in to experience in a human dimension what that's going to be like. And that sort of, I think, by definition, if there was a definition, would be imperfect. And so, if you're not perfect, then good. You're right on right on schedule. You're in the right place. So Wayne Dyer made this phrase famous. It wasn't his, but he spoke about it a lot. That we're not human beings trying to have a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings trying to have a human experience. And I heard that for a long time, but it wasn't until just recently that I actually really understood the piece about in there about having a human experience. So it's not having a human experience as if we were perfect divine beings, and so living a perfect human existence. It's perfect divine beings coming here to have a necessarily, sloppy, uh, duality ridden experiential time of it on earth. Yeah, not in my most eloquent mode there, but I think you get my point. Okay, so that's tip number one. Really, is just short and simple of it. Cut yourself some slack. Whatever standards you've been holding yourself to, whatever lofty visions you have had and you think were your purpose for coming here, chill out. And just when you start really being yourself as you are, that's when you'll be really putting out and living your divine purpose. All right. Number two, stop telling stories. So much of why we feel bad about ourselves or why we feel down about our lives or whatever, it's the stories that we tell ourselves. Something happens, okay, an incident happens. It's an incident. It's a finite thing, but instead of just sort of letting it come and go, we keep laying on top of it, on top of it, on top of it, um, these layers of judgment and of bringing stories about what happened in the past so that we get this huge pile. And before you know it, you're just like buried under all of that story. So stop telling stories. And if you can't stop telling stories, then start making up better stories, right? And instead of telling yourself, like, oh, this always happens to me and it never works out, and I know I'm gonna, get there late and they're gonna be mad at me, and just, this whole rolling thing that we can do to ourselves. Make up something that's got, a happier, more uplifted vibe. I mean, you're making these stories up anyway. You might as well make up something that feels better, like wow, I'm gonna it's going to take longer than I thought, apparently, to get to work. And, maybe I'm going to see something on this trip that I wouldn't have seen if I was rushing madly off and there was no traffic. And um, perhaps I'm going to, miss that person that I hate crossing in the hallway. And I'll be showing up just in time that the boss is coming out of the elevator looking for someone to give new responsibilities to. And there I am. Why not? I made that up. I made up the other one. The other piece about telling stories, if you're going to keep telling them, is if there's a story, you know, some stories we keep telling over and over about who we are or how something went or how we were, a bad person for this or that. So I invite you to try to tell a different story. And you might even need to bring in some help, some loving friends or family who are not standing in judgment of you the way you're standing in judgment of you, and ask them to help you kind of rewrite a story. So um, let's see, say the story is, uh, I was working so hard and I was just a workaholic and I never stopped to um, play with my children or my partner, and I just wasted all of my time and I just feel horrible about it, and on and on. You could probably do a better job of that than I can, since I don't have kids. Um, but instead, tell a story that I care so much about my family that I did whatever I needed to, whatever was possible to provide for them. And even though I only had a little bit left at the end of the day or at the end of the week, and it didn't ever feel like enough, I still tried to give whatever I could. Same circumstances, same amount of time, same quality time, same not time, but it feels so different. In one, you're valuing yourself and you're doing the best you can. And the other one, you're just putting yourself down and just looking at, what's missing instead of what you brought. Okay, so that's tip two, is to stop telling stories. Stop telling stories. If you can't stop telling stories, make up a better story. And if you can't do that either, then bring in some help and look at those stories that you've been telling yourself and look at them from a different vantage point. Look at them as if you were looking at yourself, or look at them as if you were looking at your best friend who you wanted to help buoy up and see their own value and their own goodness. Okay, tip number 3, ask different questions. You know, we're always talking to ourselves and asking questions, and our brain, when we're asked questions, naturally wants to provide answers. And so it really matters the kind of questions you're asking. So if, for example, you're on your way out the door and you can't find your keys and you get annoyed with yourself and the question is like, why do I always forget my keys? Your brain is going to want to answer that. And those answers are not going to be, pretty. I mean, they're going to be like, well, because you're scatterbrained or you're losing your memory or you got too many things on your mind or, whatever like that. It's not helpful. So instead, you could ask yourself, just turn it around and say, I wonder how I can keep better track of my keys. And then your mind wants to start to answer that. And it thinks, well, maybe, I don't, always put them in the same place. Maybe I could start to put them in a one place. Maybe a hook by the door. Maybe get one of those clapper things, or the call your phone and it beeps things or whatever. But the difference just of the question of why do I always, which just drags in any reason you can think of why you might always. And of course, you never always anyway. You sometimes, you maybe most of the time, but you're never always, because in every new moment, a new possibility exists. Okay, that was a little digression there. So what my point, right? So if you ask, why is this always happening? You're going to get answers to that question. If you ask, how can I do this differently? You're going to start getting answers to that question. Which answers would you want? Which ones will help you more? Which are useful? So instead of saying, I can't believe I'm always choosing the same kind of partner for this relationship and I'm always in these terrible relationships and why do I keep doing this to myself and blah, blah, blah. Again, you're going to get a whole lot of answers about that, about your childhood and your past and your who's around and your neighborhood and your what they tell you and how you feel about yourself and just this, whole, I mean, you could go on and on and on, right? If you ask yourself instead, I've been doing this so many times, I'm really tired of it. How can I change this? How can I make different choices in the future? Again, your mind is going to step up and it's going to want to answer and help you figure that out. I could come up with a different criteria. I could start hanging out in different places and meeting new people. I could see myself differently. I could value myself more than I have been before so that I don't go out with the same schlemiels that I was going out with before, that I'm not willing to even. You get my point, I think. Okay, so that's it. I mean, 3 simple little points that I just dragged out into a very, kind of long, convoluted thing there, but I just wanted to give you some examples and some ideas so you know what I'm talking about. And so just to recap that the 3 tips on how you can feel better about yourself, about your life, without changing a thing, without changing anyone else, without even really changing yourself, just changing your perspective. The first one, cut yourself some slack. Cut yourself some slack. You weren't here to be perfect. I'm not here to be perfect. Laugh at yourself. Laugh with yourself. But do it lovingly. Stop telling stories. Stop telling mean, nasty, hate the ending stories. If you're going to keep telling stories, tell happier, more uplifting stories. And if you can't do that, get somebody to help you take the stories you already have and turn them around until, be the hero of your story. Doesn't mean everything's perfect or great, but look for your value. Look for what you're giving and bringing rather than your shortcomings. And then the third one is to ask different questions and to shift from asking questions whose answers will just keep telling you why you keep doing the same things that you keep doing. Instead, ask the questions that will help you find ideas and solutions and possibilities to make the changes that you want to change and be the one that you want to live the life you want to be living. Be the one you want to be. That's what was coming out. Sometimes there's just so many thoughts in there and they're just all scrambling to get out first. Anyway, so I share this with you with love, with hope that something here is meaningful to you, that it's helpful to you. Personally, I have dealt with all of this stuff. I have lived most of my life being pretty harsh and hard on myself, and seeing how incapacitating that is. How really it doesn't do anything but just keep you small and keep you, wanting to stay hidden, even when at the same time, like I felt like I had this, this big life to live and this big impact to share with other people. So for all you healers and artists and dreamers and visionaries who've been too hard on yourself, overachieving, perfectionist, cut yourself some slack. I hope this was helpful. If you want to continue this conversation, you can join my group on Facebook, Spoonbenders Cafe. And if you'd like to, take any of this further, like on, personally and really dig deeper, I'm also available for coaching, and you can set up some time for a free 15-minute session with me. No strings, no obligations, no pushing, just listening to you and seeing how can I help you, and offering what I have. Just because, ultimately at the end of the day, I just want us to be here for each other. So, so that's it. Okay. I think I've probably more than covered what I meant to be saying. And if I can find the off button, I'll leave it at that. Please share this with your friends. If you like this, send it along, and leave your comments for me. I love to hear what you're thinking. Let me know how this landed with you. Let me know if you have found other techniques and ways to easily shift out of that sort of inner critic, inner gremlin place and into a more self-loving stance. All right. Thanks. Namaste. And well, I will make another little confession here, which is that I didn't look at the clock when I started here, and my intention was to run about 50 minutes. Maybe by some grace of energy and alignment, this is about 50 minutes. But if it's not, I guess if it's longer, I could edit or just hang with me. And if it's shorter, take the rest of that time and maybe just pause and reflect on yourself and find some things that you appreciate about yourself, and maybe find some half full situations that you were previously thinking were half empty. And I'll leave you with another just little story of how you can choose to see things. Yeah, that's going to get involved. Okay. Many of you may know that a year and a half ago, my partner Lynn and I were in almost ground zero of a very huge wildfire out here in Blue River, Oregon. We lost our house and everything pretty much that we owned, and as did many, many, many other people. And our little town of Blue River pretty much destroyed. We're in Oregon now, and we just had the manufactured house that's going to be our replacement home delivered onto our property yesterday, which was awesome. And that's pretty much glass like full for me. During the process of these folks maneuvering the machinery and the trucks and the tractors to get the house into position, somebody walked through part of the yard and picked up a credit card that apparently I had dropped, unbeknownst to me, and who knows when or if. They were walking in places that we probably wouldn't have necessarily walked, maybe not ever seen it. And ironically, about 2 weeks ago, I had lost this credit card, or well, I found it, but I didn't know where it was for long enough that we had to cancel it and get a new one. And what's special about this credit card is that it has a picture of our dog Trouble, who, in the midst of, after the aftermath of the fire, couple of months later, she actually passed. She had cancer and kind of hung around, sort of stayed through the toughest time for us, and then went into kidney failure, and we had to let her go. And so it was difficult to lose use of this card, because every time you take out your credit card, there's Trouble, and it was just this little happy moment. And so I lost the card the first time, and we had just gotten the replacement back, and I'd been using the card, and I don't even know how I managed to drop it wherever I dropped it, and how this guy managed to find it where he found it. But the thing for me, besides thank you for finding the card, we don't have to go through that again, is that it felt like this wink and this message from our dog Trouble, saying, I see, we're going back home, and it's okay. And when you're looking for the blessings in your life, you start to find them. And, you could say that I just made that up, and, sort of reminder of like the placebo effect, right? Like I felt better, even though there was really nothing in that medicine. And maybe there was really nothing in finding that card. And yet how I chose to look at it and interpret it, the point of view, the perspective that I took, was uplifting to me and heartwarming. And there are so many instances and opportunities in our life to meet or approach in that way. And yet, again, because of conditioning and training and teaching and rules and all of that, we tend to look at the other. It would be more like, I can't believe you lost it again. And, what's wrong with you? And what's the matter? And, we tend to go there. Going there is easy. The path is well worn. Going the other way and just appreciating that this guy found it, that I didn't have to run around looking for it, and that it came with the face of our beloved dog Trouble, just felt a whole lot better and was a lot kinder to myself than, where I could have gone. And so I leave you with that story and that point of view, and invite you to just keep looking in your life and see where you may find some of these ideas that resonate, and some places that you can shift into being kinder to yourself. So thank you for hanging with me and listening to me. And I would love to hear your comments. Share it with your friends if you think it'd be meaningful to them, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks.